Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wordfence Live. Today's August 25th, 2020. We're going to get everything going here in just a moment. I see we have some viewers joining and getting settled in still. My name is Scott Miller, and I'm a customer support engineer here at Wordfence. And in a few moments, I'm going to be joined by QA engineer and threat analyst Ram Gall. So let us know where you're viewing from in the chat. I see we got a bunch of activity there. Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear. In today's episode, we have an exciting one. So if you're just getting ready to start an e-commerce store or perhaps a WooCommerce store, then we're going to be letting you know some things to consider before launching your site, and more specifically, what you need to be thinking about and some regulations and things to follow for e-commerce security. So if you're excited about today's stream, hit the like button below the video here, and we'll be sure to continue to make similar content going forward. You can also hit the subscribe button and the bell, and you'll be notified each week when we go live. And typically we go live every Tuesday here for Wordfence Live, and that's at noon Eastern Time, 9 a.m. Pacific. So as I said, let us know where you're viewing from. I am streaming live here from my home, and I'm just south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's a little bit cloudy. I got a big window here. It's a little cloudy, not too great out today, but it could be worse. Let us know what it's looking like where you are. I see an array of different locations. I do see we got a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania native there, so welcome. So we've been doing this Wordfence Live stream for 4 months, maybe more now. So if you want to catch up on some of the content, we have a bunch of shows archived on the YouTube channel. So if you search Wordfence or click Wordfence after the show's done, you can check out what we've went over. Ram and Chloe are frequent guests. They've went over some pretty cool vulnerabilities and walked you through how those can be exploited. So those are really fun to watch and learn from. And we've set up a lot of Wordfence features, going over some of our premium features as well as a vast majority of our free features. So definitely check out the YouTube channel here, and keep an eye out for our next week's video. We always post a little early, letting you know what we're going to be covering so that you can get prepared for that. If you're completely new to Wordfence, if you're just joining, you just heard about us, I'll give you a quick little overview. Wordfence is a security plugin for WordPress, and WordPress itself is now powering about 35% of the web. So it's a target for attackers and hackers and bots, and that's where Wordfence comes into play. Wordfence is a freely available plugin for WordPress, and it powers, we're protecting over 3 million sites. And like I said, we got a bunch of free features. So if you're not using security right now, or maybe you're considering switching over to Wordfence, you have that free option there. And about 85–90% of the features are there and available in the free version. It's not constantly nagging you to upgrade. You're getting a lot of protection with the firewall there. So it's going to block attacks from malicious attackers, and we're constantly introducing new firewall rules and malware signatures, as well as features. So definitely give it a look if you have not already. You can download that from wordpress.org or from the plugins section of your site. We'd love to hear how long you've been using Wordfence, and perhaps Wordfence Premium as well, and how helpful it's been for you. If maybe you've used the site audit or site cleaning services that we have in the past, let us know. We'd be happy to hear that. We've been protecting sites for close to a decade. So, speaking of the audit and the site cleaning services that we offer, a lot of these people here at Wordfence have been doing site cleanings and audits, and they've been seeing, all of this stuff over this time that we've been protecting sites. So if you're interested in any of that, or just using the Wordfence plugin, you're getting a lot of protection there. In today's episode, as I said, Wordfence Live, we're going to be sharing some information on e-commerce security and how Wordfence can help there, and some of our services can help. And if you're just getting ready to launch a site, or maybe you already have a site, some of these might be a refresher for you. or something to guide you along the way. If you have any feedback or tips regarding e-commerce, Wordfence, how it works with WooCommerce, anything that you found along the way, let us know in the chat, and we'll be keeping an eye there. So we are broadcasting from Zoom to YouTube. Speaking of the chat, so we ask that you don't put anything too sensitive in the chat. You'd be better off sending us an email if you have anything personal for your site that would mention your site or your email or a specific compromise. You're free to email us at feedback@wordfence.com. And you can use the subject line Wordfence Live there, and we'll get eyes on it and get back to you as quick as we can. See some users in chat have been using Wordfence for 5 years. Susan, that's cool to hear. Lots of scans and lots of blocked attacks, I'm sure. So as I mentioned, we're going to be checking out the e-commerce security, but specifically we're looking at the PCI DSS requirements. And that stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And what that is pretty much 12 requirements that you're going to want to follow to comply to that. And Ram's going to give us a little bit of an overview. So let's bring in our QA engineer and threat analyst, Ram Gall. How's it going over there, Ram?
Hi, I'm in Arizona. It's the hottest summer on record. So if you hear the air conditioning kick on, that's why. Just so you know.
What's the temperature over there right now, or don't I want to know?
You know what? I think it's probably under 100 right now, but I think the high is going to be 114, 115, like it's been every day this past week. So.
Oh, goodness. Well, normally we have another familiar face here, Chloe, but she has the day off, so hopefully she's enjoying that and keeping cool. I always turn the AC off for our live stream, so it gets a little warm in here, but if that's the worst I have to worry about, I'll be all right. Plus, it's not too bad here in the Pittsburgh area. I think we're in the mid 80s, so it could definitely be worse. So we're going to be looking at the PCI DSS requirements. And this is something that Ram and I have been looking into here. Without spoiling too much, Ram, I know you and I looked at some of the information last night just regarding some statistics with compliancy to PCI DSS. And just a reminder, that's Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And Ram's going to be talking about that in a moment. But some of those numbers that we saw were pretty surprising, right?
Yeah. PCI DSS was something that I was familiar with, but I hadn't gone down the, deep research angle on it for a while. And it turns out that Verizon does a yearly study on compliance. It turns out that only like 20% of businesses in America are actually fully compliant. But there's something more interesting, and that's that 18% of data breaches apparently happened because the business didn't have a firewall. And another 40% of data breaches could potentially have been stopped if they did, or where not having a firewall was a contributing factor. So that's
now,
overall, almost 60%.
Yeah, I wonder what constitutes. Now, I believe that this is split into a few different levels as far as your business in e-commerce or just a business in general holding this credit card information and other information. So those are pretty alarming numbers for companies not using a firewall at all. That's a little bit alarming. And like you said, the Verizon report specifically goes pretty in depth with a lot of information. So that's freely available for anybody who's interested in checking that out. So what is the PCI DSS exactly?
Well, you've already, the acronym stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, like you said. But I think a takeaway from this is that it's an industry standard. So it's not a law, but that doesn't mean there's not consequences for not adhering to it. The big one is that if a data breach happens on your watch because your company wasn't compliant, the credit card companies will basically charge your merchant service provider bank penalties of like $5,000 a month up to $500,000 a month. And usually the payment capture portal or merchant service provider will pass the charges on to you. So Yeah, it's kind of important to be compliant. Not to mention that if you're, out for non-compliance and you don't regain compliance, they could just no longer do business with you, and you no longer have any way to have your customers pay you.
Yeah, eventually down the line, if you just continue to not use or follow these 12 recommendations or requirements to comply, you're just not going to have any bank or card companies to work with, and you're going to incur some fines along the way. They'll make them way their way back to you. But who needs to follow these sorts of standards for payments?
Literally anyone who handles credit card information. It doesn't matter if you're online, doesn't matter if you're, you've got a brick and mortar store, if you're like a mail per catalog, or, if you've got a booth in a farmer's market, you need to adhere to the standards. And
if I'm remembering correctly, there's some questionnaires that you can take on their site to see exactly where you're at in it's a self-assessment questionnaire.
Yeah, the good news is that for most smaller merchants, and it does vary depending on how many transactions you do a year and how much you make in a year. For a lot of companies, a self-assessment is fine. Just have to fill one of those out. There's different ones depending on what your business model is. I think Tim is going to post a link to some of them in the chat just so that you guys can check them out.
Yeah, let us know in chat as well. If you're actively aware of these 12 requirements for the PCI DSS, and if that's something that you're monitoring regularly, if you were aware of them before you started your store, or if perhaps you're just getting ready to launch something, that would be something we would be interested in seeing. So what do you think, Ram? Should we just jump right in?
Yeah, I do want to say that, now that I've scared everyone half to death with like, oh no, $500,000 a month in penalties, there is good news. And especially for WooCommerce, particularly the biggest payment gateways are merchant service providers like Stripe or PayPal and some of the others. They offer PCI compliant solutions where they handle almost all of the compliance for you. They make it so that credit card information never actually ends up on or through your site. It just gets directly entered into a frame on their site. You'll still need an SSL or TLS certificate on your site in order to actually meet their standards. And there are still a few things that can threaten that. But the good news is that there are a lot of options that will take care of it for you to a large extent. If you're not comfortable with meeting all of these standards yourself, it's a good idea to research which gateways will actually handle the compliance for you and pick one of those.
Okay, that's good to know. We have some people in chat saying, they're not aware of these 12 requirements. So we're glad that you joined today. We're going to go through these and, try to add what we can, where we can with these points, and let our services and our features that come, in the free plugin as well as in the premium plugin that can give you a hand with complying here. So
You want to say that even if you're not handling the compliance yourself, even if you don't have to worry about the specific fees, the compliance steps are a really good way to prevent data breaches in general. And even if you don't lose actual credit card information, if you're running an online store, a data breach still means, losing customer address and name and email address information. And I'm not going to dig too much into GDPR because this is not about that. But if you do have a data breach, you could still be, even if it's not credit card information, even if it's just that kind of information, you could still be fined under GDPR. So do them anyways.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the worst case scenario here is a data breach where, customer payment information is lost, because then, especially if it's due to something simple in these 12 requirements, because there's a lot of things in these requirements that can just be done fairly easily. So we're going to go through and try to help everybody understand these the best we can. So let's start at one, and just a reminder, these are the 12 requirements for the PCI DSS, and we're going to be trying to relate these to an e-commerce or WooCommerce store the best we can. and I see quite a few of you are just starting to learn about this now. So point one for the PCI DSS requirement is to install and maintain a firewall configuration, and that is specifically to protect cardholder data. And this protection can be done at a few levels, and it's certainly recommended at a few levels, and that's the network level, which can be done most cases via your hosting provider. So depending on who you're hosted with, you may now be aware what they are scanning your site with, or if they offer something to scan your site, and keep things protected on that side. So check with them if you're not sure. The second level is the application level, where we recommend using an endpoint firewall, and that's what Wordfence is, an endpoint firewall. So, and that's opposed to a cloud-based firewall, which there's a lot of evidence out there that it can be easily bypassed. And you can check out some information on the wordfence.com homepage where we compare a cloud-based and endpoint firewall. So,
I mean, use both if you can.
There you go. Better protection, use both, and definitely, as I recommended, check with your hosting provider, see what they offer. Hopefully they're already protecting you at that level. Endpoint firewalls such as Wordfence, RAM, it lives in your WordPress installation, so it's seeing everything there. Is that right?
It sees all the requests that come into your site. Really one of the biggest advantages of endpoint firewalls is that they are harder to bypass than cloud-based firewalls. But I mean, there's cloud-based and network and endpoint firewalls. So use all three if you can.
Yeah, definitely. If you're not using anything, and we see a lot of people that come to the booth at WordCamps that they're just not sure if they're using a firewall or protection, or they say their hosting provider is protecting them. Like Ram's saying here, there's still always options and different layers to protect.
Yeah, exactly. And the other biggest thing about an endpoint firewall like Wordfence is that we'll update it with rules against the latest vulnerabilities very quickly. Most network firewalls, most cloud-based firewalls are basically only protect against sort of, I want to say, generic vulnerabilities or patterns, attack patterns, but don't necessarily attack against specific attacks against specific vulnerabilities in most cases. So.
And for anybody who isn't aware, this is one of the things that RAM does. RAM and Chloe are threat analysts, threat researchers. So they're looking for these vulnerabilities and plugins and putting firewall rules out there to protect against these, sometimes the same day we find them, oftentimes not very long after. And that's one of the differences, when we're finding these vulnerabilities, which we do regularly, we're getting this protection out there quick for people. So Ram, what's the second requirement for the PCI DSS?
So the second requirement is basically don't use vendor supplied defaults for system passwords and other security parameters, which is kind of a really dry way of saying make sure that your password isn't password one, make sure that your username isn't admin, make sure to update the password to something complex. Don't just go with whatever support sets up your first password to be on anything, because that has some pretty severe consequences. And this includes your hosting account, this includes your WP admin, this includes your FTP password, it includes your email password, it includes your database password. And again, the good news is that most of these they'll have ways of generating secure passwords right on the first time you log in, and most hosting providers even give you an automatic secure database password, since you'll never really have to mess with it yourself. But double check, make sure that none of these passwords are something dumb like password.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to bring up with regard to the database password. A follow up to that. And like you said, even WordPress right there, it gives you the option to generate a complex password. So that's what you should be doing, is generating complex and unique passwords for all of the services and different tools that you're using, such as FTP and whatnot. But how frequently do you recommend changing passwords? Now, it depends on what sort of site you're running. Sally's cat blog, if there's nothing being sold on the site and you're logging in here and there and you've never been compromised, that's one thing. But on an e-commerce site, would you say that, changing some of these things as frequently as 1 to 3 months would be recommended?
30 to 90 days does seem to be a reasonable compromise between, having, well, if you're using a password manager, you can change it fairly frequently. You don't even have to remember the passwords. So if you use a password manager, then you can change as often as you want. And more frequently is better to a point within reason, because you don't want to be spending all of your time resetting passwords.
Yeah, there's going off of this password thing, we bring this up very frequently on Wordfence Live. And a few weeks ago, we had, the top 10 biggest mistakes that people run into. And, outside of updating things and keeping things up to date, you can also be updating your password. So if you're not currently using a, password manager, put that on your list of things to check out if that's something you might find useful, because it just allows you the ability to use something complex and it's an easy way to remember it. So before I move on to the third requirement, anything we missed there, Ram?
I don't really think so. It's one of those things that should be self-evident. It just kind of, gets ignored sometimes.
The third requirement is protecting stored cardholder data. So you might be asking what constitutes the cardholder data. That would be the cardholder name, the expiration date, and the service code. So you're looking right off the bat, everything that is on the physical card or that the customer may know themselves. And then you also need to protect the sensitive authentication data, which includes the full magnetic stripe data, the pins, etc., and that information. So definitely check out the site here. Whenever you do the self-assessment test, you can look into a little more information of what needs to be protected here. But you
And
also need, go ahead.
oh, sorry, I just want to say that there's definitely like a difference between protected though, because like stuff like the account number and full name and like expiration date, those are fine if they're encrypted. But stuff like the CVV code or the PIN or like the full magstrap data, those should never be stored, period. Like those should not exist anywhere in any of your systems. Like there's a reason that you need to enter the CVV code every time you make a purchase in most cases. So.
That's very, very good information. And that goes to, a later point whenever you're backing things up on your site, especially if you're self-hosted and you're holding some of this cardholder data, as Ram said, some of that is stuff that you do not want to be storing. Also included in personally identifiable information is the IP address. That's worth noting whenever you're protecting this data, that falls under that as well. So the best way, and as Ram said here, the best way to keep data secure is to not keep it. And you can limit the data storage amount and retention time to just what is required legally or regulatorily, or just what your business needs, and then cut anything out that you do not need as far as storing that. For a last point for this cardholder data, you want to limit who has access to this overall. And this is a recurring point along the way. And, on Wordfence Live, it just
We'll hit
it
that
goes
at
along.
0.7, I think.
Yeah, it goes a long way to not give access, to everybody. Does somebody need administrator access? And that's something you need to always be asking yourself. If you're allowing somebody to log in to edit a post, they should not be set up as an administrator. If you're setting up a lot of administrators down the line, it's going to interfere with the integrity of some of these points here, and it's going to make it more difficult to keep this data protected. So requirement 4, RAM, this is what, encrypting transmission of data?
Yeah. Basically, anytime you send any of that cardholder data over open public networks, and that's basically anytime it goes over the internet or over any sort of network that's not your own personal private network, it needs to be encrypted. And the easiest way to do this is to use an SSL or TLS certificate. Now, those are pretty easy. We've discussed options like Let's Encrypt in the past. There is no reason to not have a TLS certificate on every single site you own. It's also good for your SEO. But there's other things you want to make sure of. If you're actually making sure that everything's encrypted, you want to make sure that your site settings, your site URL is set to the encrypted version of your site, so that if anyone goes to the insecure version of the site, it gets redirected. You'll want to make sure that any references to like images or links to your site in the database refer to the secure version of your site, the HTTPS version. If you're using WooCommerce, you will want to force secure checkout, and I believe that is on by default, and it will yell at you if you do anything else, but still, listen to it if it yells at you about it. And the last thing that I don't think that most people think of that much, and it's not really technically cardholder data, but like FTP. FTP is still one of the remaining ways in which we still transmit like passwords in an unencrypted form. So like if you're on an airport Wi-Fi, and I don't know if we'll ever really be on airport Wi-Fi ever again, but
fingers crossed we get there eventually.
Yeah, and you use and if you're sitting there, you're using FTP to like upload a change to your site. Anyone else on that airport Wi-Fi might be able to sniff your FTP username and password and gain total access to your site. So you can use SFTP, which is basically FTP over SSH. You can use FTPS, which is basically FTP with a TLS certificate. But yes, anytime you're transmitting any kind of sensitive data, make sure to use encryption.
Yeah, one of the frequently asked questions on their site is it goes over one of these things, and using SSL certificates alone is not enough to be compliant here, and it's sometimes alarming how many customer sites we see down the line that that aren't using SSL, and it's increasingly simple to implement now with hosting providers offering it and so on and so forth. So definitely something, if you're considering an e-commerce store or you're running one now, double check on that at the very least. And relating to this, we have a Wordfence site audit that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit that goes over a lot of these points and double checks these things for you. And that comes with a 60-point inspection to let you know if your PHP version is severely out of date, if you're not using SSL and things are configured incorrectly. So definitely some things to consider there. Now, point 5 for the regulation is to use and regularly update antivirus software or programs. Now, so you're going to want to be scanning for malware, for intrusion detection, and this is something that we do at the application level. I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to check with your hosting provider to see what they offer. And as Ram said, if you're using cloud-based and endpoint and your hosting provider is also scanning, then you're doing good there. So check with them, see what they offer, and make sure that you are scanning for malware. And if you're using Wordfence, and ideally if you're protected with Wordfence Premium, you're ahead of the game there. It's worth
We do
noting,
regularly update our virus or our malware detection signatures. I frequently help update them. So
yeah, you can believe Ram when he tells you that we regularly update that. So it's worth noting that remote scanning alone is not going to be enough here. It can show and alert you of an indication of a compromise, but that could be about it. So remote scanning is looking for what's served to the browser. If you have a redirect happening at that point, you'll be alerted. But if you have a backdoor on the site, if information is being logged, a remote scanner might not see this. So it's specifically looking at the output there.
I do want to say that there's one caveat to that, and there is one specific type of malware that can actually compromise card holder data, even if you're using a PCI compliant payment gateway, even if none of the information is actually staying on your site and it's just like an iframe going to their server. If you have like a JavaScript keylogger on your site, that's a very particular type of malware running in JavaScript. It can steal people's credit card information as they're entering it in. The good news is that a lot of people nowadays, they'll store that information in their browsers or their mobile device in a relatively secure format. And I don't believe that most keyloggers have adapted to that yet. In any case, those will be picked up by any of the given virus scan solutions. So,
Okay, that's good to know. Now, what's the sixth requirement here, Ram?
sixth requirement is actually the big one when it comes to like total number of breaches. Like it caused 26% of breaches and contributed to 32% of breaches. But that's mostly because it's kind of like the catch-all for all the others, and it's develop and maintain secure systems and applications, which I mean means so many different things. Like unlike the others where they're pretty specific, this is just like, covers everything. It covers keeping your plugins updated. It covers keeping your WordPress core updated. It covers keeping your PHP and MySQL versions updated and your Apache or Nginx updated. It covers, keeping your PC that you use to interact with your store updated. It means choosing vendors that use secure practices. WooCommerce is pretty decent with that. They get audited pretty regularly. It does mean things like isolating your sites. So like don't set up multiple e-commerce shops on the same hosting account, because if one of them gets infected, then the rest will get infected too. It means things like, use a test site, a staging site, a dev environment for your e-commerce site. That way you aren't left with an older copy of the site sitting in a subfolder where, it might be vulnerable because you didn't keep it updated. It means removing plugins and themes you're not using. It means hardening WordPress, and you can Google that. And many of the suggestions are useful. We've mentioned, changing your admin URL. Take that one with a grain of salt. It's not really a good security feature. It is useful for cutting down on the amount of basically noise, but yeah, it's pretty much that develop and maintain secure systems and application means a lot, and we're mostly focusing on what it means in a WordPress and WooCommerce context, which is keep things up to date.
Yeah, lots of updating there to stay compliant. And if you were here a few weeks ago, you may remember that we went over the WordPress 5.5 release. And if you've been in the loop, that includes the option to at least update automatically your plugins and themes. So that is a help there. And if you're not sure if that's something you should be doing or not, maybe you're running a very large e-commerce store, and maybe it's not going to be a good idea for you, but you can check out that episode from a few weeks ago, and Chloe and Ram both laid out some very helpful information there with regard to what you should be doing with auto updates. And if you'd rather read it instead, we had a blog post on August 6th, which is titled WordPress Auto Updates, What Do You Have to Lose? And hopefully we can link that into the chat for you. Lots of good information there. If you're not an e-commerce store and you don't log in very often, maybe you want them updating automatically and just keeping you up to date. But if you're a larger e-commerce store, you're making thousands of sales a day, then you probably have somebody keeping an eye on this stuff already, and you might not want to update right off the bat automatically. So check those out and let us know if you have any question. At this point, we just want to take a moment like we always do on Wordfence Live, and thanks everybody for coming out and hanging out with us and asking questions. I saw
You guys are awesome.
Yeah, we had about 300 people waiting before we went live, so we always appreciate it. And as Ram said, we're not sure when the next time we'll get to be in an airport and go to a WordCamp. So in the meantime, this is our way to talk security with everybody and just interact. So we appreciate it. And we've been doing these, like I said earlier, since about April. And if there's anything you'd like to see us cover, feel free to send in your feedback. As I said, feedback@wordfence.com. You can also write it into chat, and we'll take note of anything we see there. If you're not a premium subscriber already, as I said, we like to say thanks, because our premium subscribers are one of the reasons why we're able to do this, and also one of the reasons why Ram and Chloe and the Threat Intel team are able to spend the time that they do finding these vulnerabilities and getting out new firewall rules. And those firewall rules are one of the best features that we offer for premium features. Those are sent out immediately. You don't need to do anything to update those. They're sent out to you and they're put into effect right off the bat. Similarly to our real-time IP blacklist, which is my favorite feature. One reason is because you don't have to maintain it yourself. It's just one of those magic things that works, and it's due to the people, in behind the scenes at Wordfence that keep track of this. But basically, what's happening is the real-time IP blacklist is protecting you from the most malicious IPs that are hitting WordPress and Wordfence sites at any given time. If you're worried that we might be unnecessarily blocking IPs, we keep track of these IPs. When we see that they slow down, they get removed from the list. If they pick it back up again, they're back on the list. So we are keeping track of these. It's automatically populated, and it's automatically in effect as soon as you put your license in. So if you're using premium right now, you can check it out in live traffic and filter the traffic by the blocked and blocked by firewall. And you might see a lot of blocks being made there. It really just takes some of the stress off your site. They're not able to interact with the site at that point. Another feature is country blocking. So if you're running an e-commerce store and you just have a few administrators logging in through the WP login area, one option would be use country blocking to block countries that you're seeing actively try to brute force the login form, and you can then block those countries from the login form only. And that will cut down on the stress that your brute force protection and firewall might be seeing. So makes it a little easier for you to not have to worry about those password guessing attacks like that. So earlier I mentioned we have a site audit service as well. If you're just now getting ready to launch an e-commerce site, you really can't beat the site audit service. Normally priced at $179, it comes with a $99 license included. Or if you already have a license, we can extend that license for you if you buy the audit or cleaning, or you can get an additional license. It's your choice. So the audit, if we were to find anything malicious on the site, is automatically switched over to a cleaning, and you have a 90-day guarantee. So overall, if you have an e-commerce site, if you're seeing anything that you're not sure of, or you think there might be a compromise, check out those two services, and we'll link you to those in the chat.
Even if you don't have an e-commerce site.
Yes, and that was my next point here. This site cleaning service and site audit service, Sally's Cat blog could benefit from it. A personal site, a personal blog, anything.
Sally's Cat blog has been hacked several times. I've seen it live.
I think Chloe has also hacked me a few times, so I would probably also be a good candidate for a site clean. So very reasonably priced, and like I said, 90-day guarantee. If you have a site and you're on WordPress and you're seeing anything out of place, definitely consider it. There's a lot of value there, and you can't go wrong. So we're going to jump back into the 12 PCI DSS requirements, and we're picking up at point number 7, which is restricting access to cardholder data.
I think this one's your favorite. This one is definitely your favorite.
Yes. I've talked about this about 100 times recently in Wordfence Live. So this is restricting by business need to know. This should be a common practice on your site, really, no matter what level of site you're running. If you're running a very simple blog, you shouldn't be handing out WP admin accounts to just anybody. And that goes right along the line of, who would you give access to your bank account or your PayPal account? There should be a trust developed there, and you should know who you're giving this information out to. One thing that you can consider is the free feature in Wordfence, which is login security, which has 2FA. And also with 2FA, you have the ability to set some time in between, and I can't think of the name of the feature, Ram. It's slipping my mind.
Grace period.
The grace period, yes. I'm a big fan of the grace period, so I'm disappointed that it slipped away from me there. If you have to give access to your site, and it doesn't matter if you're running an e-commerce site or not, you should potentially consider requiring 2FA, and I would recommend having 2FA required for all accounts. And whenever you require that, if you create a new admin or somehow a new administrator is created, they should not be able to log in without having 2FA set up. So they will see an error message. And what you can do there is set up the grace period for a day or two and allow them to log in and set that 2FA up. And that's in the event that you need to allow WP admin access. So just make sure you're restricting access to the cardholder data to who needs it necessarily. Anything else to add there, Rim?
Yeah. So you'll hear a lot of advice to avoid SMS, basically text message based two-factor authentication. And that's because it can be attacked, it can be intercepted. And if you are being targeted, you really don't want to use it. You'll want to use login security TOTP based app. But with that said, SMS based two-factor authentication is still better than not using two-factor authentication at all. So
yeah, and we switched over to that some releases ago. I'm not sure when that was, but now if you're using the legacy 2FA, you still may be using SMS code. You may be getting text and SMS codes for your two-factor authentication. And as Ram said, that is better than not using 2FA, but you do have the option to switch from the legacy version of the 2FA to our new login security options, which is
way more awesome
based. Yeah, there's more options. The TOTP based apps are easy to use and I never have any issues. There's multiple that we have tested and you can check that out in our login security documentation. What do we have for point number 8, Ram?
So point number 8 is assign a unique ID to each with computer access. This one's pretty simple, but it mostly boils down to, don't just share your admin username and password with someone if you need to give them temporary administrative rights. If you need to give someone access, make a new user for them so you can track what they did, so that it's not just the one administrator did all the things and you're not sure if it was John or Bob or Tina logged in at that time. It could have been anyone. You want to make separate accounts for each person. And that way you can...
With the separate accounts, like we said earlier, ideally you're using a complex username there, not something easily guessable, and a unique or complex password for each admin account.
Yeah, it's basically the accountability portion of security where you want to be able to track who does what. So, and I think honestly, 8 and 9 are actually both fairly short and fairly self-evident, but 9 doesn't even really doesn't really count when it comes to online stores because it's restrict physical access to cardholder data.
Yeah, you might be able to check if your hosting provider is PCI-DSS compliant. If you're using a very small host or just something very, very cheap you're not sure of, you might want to check.
If it's some guy who has a server in his closet, then he's probably not compliant. If it's any of the major or even medium-sized hosts, is probably fine. They have their servers in cages with security cameras.
Yeah, and going back to, if you're hosting an e-commerce site in your closet, you're going to want to keep in mind that you don't want to store or download customer data to your personal computer or into personal backups, or else then you're going through all of these points again for that backup. You need to know what you're holding in there because you shouldn't be holding some of it, as we mentioned earlier on, at all. And so you're going to have a security policy for your backups, for storing that personally identifiable information. And overall, that just wouldn't be a good way to run an e-commerce site.
I do want to mention that we did get a question, which was any recommendations to have clients provide their credentials securely. And realistically, the best way to have your clients provide their credentials securely is to not have them provide their credentials at all. Have them make a new account for you, and then you can use the password reset feature. Since that's kind of related to, what we just covered.
Yeah, no, we had another question relating to PayPal as a payment tool. I believe you mentioned earlier, some of these services are protecting you against these, regulations automatically. I'm not sure if we know specifically about PayPal or not.
I believe PayPal is basically handles PCI compliance for you. And again, it's not really a regulation; it's an industry standard. So it doesn't mean it's not. It's still not a law. It still means that there's consequences for not complying. So we got one about Chase Payment Tech, which I actually haven't done the research on. So
Okay.
yes. The real takeaway is before you decide on a merchant service provider, research to see if they'll handle the compliance for you. Because if they do, that is probably worth it.
Yeah, so that's a good thing to keep in mind. That covers, as you mentioned, point nine is physical access to data. So it's not really 100% related to the e-commerce. But point 10, RAM, I think is.
Oh, yes. 10 is 100% something that is important. It's track and monitor all access to network resources and cardholder data. That kind of ties in with point 8. But this is one of those things where you'll probably want to do some hosting provider shopping to see how much logging they allow, because you want to keep things like access logs. You want to keep things like FTP logs. If your cPanel doesn't let you log things, then this is not going to be something you can really keep track of. You want to download all of your logs and keep them backed up for like 12 months. You want to log successful transactions and failed transactions, and when they happened. And realistically, apart from the firewall thing and the secure systems and applications, this was, I believe, the second biggest contributing factor to data breaches in general. I don't actually have the stats on exactly how much it contributed, but I think it was something like, hold on.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah,
while
this
RAM
was like
checks for that,
40%.
wanted to make note, some hosting providers, their default settings for your access logs and what you're logging in general is they're going to be different. So if you're running an e-commerce store now or any sort of site and you want this information saved, you may have to log into your hosting provider's site with a cPanel and check and see what exactly is being saved, because sometimes you may only get a day's worth and it may start overwriting. So if you go to look at something that happened 5 or 7 days ago, it may very well not be there. So that's another
So
thing to keep in mind.
I found it. It caused 6% of data breaches, and it contributed to 40% of data breaches. And my guess is the reason that the cause is so low and the contribution is so high is that like this is one of those things where like an attacker might have started targeting a site for a little while, and if people monitoring the logs had picked it up in time, they could have stopped them before they gained access.
Okay. Yeah,
By the way, you
that's
should totally check out live traffic.
what was it?
By the way, you should totally check out live traffic if you haven't, because it does
Yeah.
let you see who's been trying to attack your site.
Yeah, live traffic, if you're not familiar with the filters in there and the advanced filters, it gives you a lot to check out. And it's also, if you're checking out your raw access logs, you can use some of that information to check on the live traffic and look specifically at those IPs. So point 11 is to regularly test your security systems and processes. Now, these are going to include things such as penetration testing. So that might be something for medium or larger e-commerce stores, but would still be a good idea if you're making sales on your site or some other sort of sites that you might be running, but definitely larger e-commerce stores. Security audits, we talked about that earlier. We offer them for a very reasonable price, and there's a lot of value there.
Now, I
So,
do want to clarify that our audits do not assure PCI-DSS compliance. There are specific vendors that will do PCI-DSS specific audits. Ours do not cover that, but they are still a great way of making sure that your site is not vulnerable.
That's a very good thing to note. Vulnerability scanning, we scan in our plugin for vulnerabilities at the application level, and you're going to see plugins, themes, and so on there, and you can get alerts on that. Intrusion detection systems, that's something that you're going to want to have, you're going to want to audit, you're going to want to look at regularly. And you want to consider auditing these or maybe considering these different points, such as penetration testing, annually or after any changes, and certainly after a compromise of any sort. So that goes back to one of our earlier points. If you get compromised at any point along the way, all those passwords that we talked about and everything like that will need to be changed. Even if you were using a complex password for something, still needs to be changed there. Anything to add to that, Ram, before we hit what I believe is our final point?
Yes, I think that that more or less covers everything. I do want to say that auditing also applies to the plugin level. So if you're using something like WooCommerce, it's a plugin that's already been audited. That does help. If you're using something like WordPress core, where there's a lot of eyes on it to make sure that it's secure, that does help. If you're using other plugins that maybe don't have any eyes on them, that can cause more problems. So it is kind of a modular thing. So, I mean, I frequently review plugin updates to make sure that no new vulnerabilities are being introduced on our own site. So having a process in place for that, especially if you're a larger site, is absolutely critical.
Yes, definitely.
And number 12, what, do you want to do number 12? I can do number 12. Okay.
Go for it.
Cool. Number 12 is basically sort of like the sum of all of the rest of these, which is maintain a policy that addresses information security for employees and contractors. And that's basically have a game plan for how you're going to implement the other parts of that, the last 12 recommendations. Update it once a year, and when anything changes, and audit what you've got and who has it, and document your policy and review it with everyone who works for you, even if they're not a full-time employee, even if they're just a contractor, but have a game plan, have it written down. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sums up everything there, just update and audit when you can. The larger your e-commerce store is, the more penalties really you could potentially face. And, Ram threw out some numbers early at the beginning of the stream. You definitely would not want to see some of those charges come down the line from your bank or card processor and find their way to you.
And bear in mind that, even if you do have a payment compliant, or even if you do have a payment processor handling most of the compliance elements for you, following these steps will still prevent your site from being breached in a lot of cases. Like, full compliance will really help.
Yeah, there's a lot of good points in there, and if you're not running an e-commerce site, there's a lot of takeaways there still for your site to keep you protected, for best practices in general. Those are the things that we try to cover, every week on Wordfence Live. I think that about wraps up our 12 points, Ram. Anything to add there before I move on?
I think that more or less covers it. I mean, you can dig into a lot of more detail on these, but just knowing that they exist and having an idea that they're good steps to follow, and that you should do your research to make sure that you're not more liable than you need to be is important.
Yeah, that would be a good first step, and then come back and go through these points and cover yourself and make sure that you're protected. Like I said earlier, we want to thank everybody for coming and joining Ram and I today and every week. I hope this wasn't. I hope some of you were here previously. Normally I ask at the beginning. Let us know if you've been here for weeks. But now I'm starting to recognize names, so I know a few of you have been here week in and week out. So we appreciate that a lot. Those were some things to consider before launching your e-commerce store. So this will be archived on YouTube after the fact, and you can go back through and check it out, and anything that you need to revisit there. And also you can send us in questions, feedback@wordfence.com. Use the subject line Wordfence Live, and we'll be sure to check it out and get back to you. If you're finding this stream helpful, if you found this information helpful, as I said earlier, hit the like button under the video and let us know. And we'll do some more similar content going forward. We have new live events typically every Tuesday for Wordfence Live. So if you subscribe and hit the bell under the video, which I urge you to do, you're going to get notifications when we go live, or if we post videos in the YouTube channel, which we do not do a lot. So you will not get bombarded with notifications there, but we have some cool videos that you can check out in the YouTube channel where Kathy narrates some different feature setups and in Wordfence and the plugin or Wordfence Central. So those are great if you're just setting up Wordfence, or if you maybe need to go back through and set something up again, you can check those out. So we've got lots of videos on there for that. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to subscribe to our mailing list, and this is perfect to sign up for if you're using the free version, because whenever Ram or Chloe or the threat intel team finds a new vulnerability, you might be hearing from it first from us. And if Ram or Chloe finds it, you're definitely going to hear from it from us first, and that'll be from the mailing list, and that'll give you the chance as a free user to either update the plugin or get rid of it and keep your site safe. If you're a premium user, you will have a firewall role or one of our current firewall roles protecting you from that at the time. So the mailing list, we don't send a bunch of stuff out. We send out new posts, and our new blog posts are typically vulnerabilities or podcast related, so you can check that out. I've been hosting the podcast now for a few weeks, so if you're interested in getting a summary of the recent news for the week in a 5 to 10 minute format, you can check that out at the bottom of the wordfence.com site as well, next to the mailing list. And that is also wordfence.com/podcast, and you can check that out on iTunes and Spotify. And if you have any feedback on that, we'd love to hear it. Thanks again to our premium subscribers and customers. We wouldn't be doing this without you, and we really appreciate it. And hopefully we get to run into some of you at a WordCamp here in the near future. We would really enjoy that. If you want to support Wordfence, you can do that in a few different ways. One way would be to purchase Wordfence Premium and get access to those premium features that we had talked about today, such as the real-time IP blacklist. I saw some people in chat praising country blocking. Country blocking is always one of my favorite features to set up, if for nothing else, just for the login form on your site. Anytime I create a new site, I lock down the login form with country blocking for all the countries outside of my own. And there's some little features in there that you can set up to make it easy in case you need to allow somebody from another country to get in, so such as the bypass cookie. So check that out. You can also check out Wordfence Central. It's a free feature from Wordfence, wordfence.com/central, where you can add all of your Wordfence protected sites, whether they're free or premium. We have customers with hundreds of sites added, and you can log in one central hub and keep an eye on the security for all of your sites in one place. You can also set up summary emails. Instead of getting individual alerts from all of your sites, you can get alerts in a summary format that just summarizes all of the sites and the security issues that we've found, and it'll help you with any alert fatigue that you might have. A couple more things to check out: fastorslow.com. If you have a site right now that you're running that you want to get an idea of how it's performing, how fast it is, go to fastorslow.com. It's a tool that we introduced. It's a profiling tool, so it's going to let you know the performance, and it's a monitoring solution for your sites, and it'll detect and report on the important factors for your users' experience on the website. So you're going to get a good idea of how your site is loading from multiple locations while using that tool. Open.film, on the topic of WordCamps, which I love bringing up on Wordfence Live, you can get an idea of what those WordCamps are like, get an idea of the people that are involved in WordPress by checking out the film that we created here at Wordfence, Mark and Kathy were involved in that heavily. Open.film. It's only about 13 minutes, I believe. And if you haven't been to a WordCamp, it really captures the community that you see there, and it's a really fun film to watch. So if you have any feedback, if there's anything you'd like to see us talk about here in the future, as I said, message in at feedback@wordfence.com. Use Wordfence Live in the subject line, and again, we appreciate everybody stopping by and hanging out with us, and we hope to see you next week. Keep an eye here on the Wordfence YouTube channel to see what we're going to be discussing next week. We always post that early to give you an idea. From all of us here at Wordfence, we really appreciate you stopping by and hanging out with us. What do you say, Ram?
Thanks for watching. And yeah, same bat time, same bat channel next week.
Have a good one, everybody. Thanks.